Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Prehm and Erik Skopil on the show. As always, today is a Wednesday, June 5th. Month of June is a very important month for high school football recruiting. And because of that, we're going to dive into a look ahead to this month, to this week, and catch you up to speed on all things Oregon football recruiting and why it's a big month for the Ducks. But first, real quick, before we dive into today's show, I do want to put it out there that, hey, like if you enjoy our work, if you enjoy our coverage on duckterritory.com, if you enjoy the work that we do on Autzen Audibles, the best way to support this podcast or this video podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, is to go to duckterritory.com right now and subscribe. That is the most impactful way to impact the show and to continue to have the show be free and as frequently as we do during the season and then the off season. And right now, you can save a huge chunk of change. We're running a 60% off annual membership promo. So for $358 a month, which comes out to being just under $43 for the entire year, you can get inside scoop on the Oregon Ducks, expert analysis and opinions from us and other analysts on the 24/7 Sports Network. You can read all the content across the 24/7 Sports Network. That's not just our stuff. That's everything. That's a VIP piece or a free piece on every site within the network. You can get hands-on connection with Eric, myself, Jared Mack, and others. And then you also get our recruiting coverage for all our sports, not just football, but the sports that we cover, men's and women's basketball, baseball, and softball as well. That's $42.96 for an entire year. If you sign up now, you get all of football season, Oregon's first in the Big Ten, all of men's and women's basketball, the first in the Big Ten. And then you get pretty much the entire year outside of playoff baseball and softball for next season. So highly encourage you guys to subscribe. And, you know, we go everywhere. Jared's right now going to College Station to cover Oregon in the college baseball playoffs, the super regional level. So, you know, Eric's gone to places for women's basketball. I've gone places for men's basketball. We're everywhere for football. This is the biggest way, best way to support us moving forward. All right, let's dive into the show, Eric.
Yeah, well, let's talk recruiting because I think that's the most pertinent thing other than Oregon baseball, and Jared will have further updates. I know he did a show last week. I think he'll have something coming up either this week or maybe after the games down in College Station. But this is where recruiting starts to pick up. And Matt, I'll toss it to you in a second to explain more of the why, but let's just go through the baseline here. Oregon in 2025, sixth best class in the Big Ten, 23rd nationally, 7 commits. All 7 of them are of the blue chip variety. That means 4 or 5 stars. I think that's a really impressive kind of starting point for this class. But June's the big month now. It used to be that was maybe November to December, sometime in the fall. You get kids on campus. Now you trip out a bunch of kids, and the Ducks have about 30, I think 30 scheduled official visits this month and starting this weekend where they have a lot of guys. Matt, can you kind of get us up to date with what's upcoming?
Yeah, so not only is it official visit season, it's also camp season. Dan Lanning and Oregon football will be hosting a football camp here in the next week on campus. They expect a bunch of players to roll through, and then a couple other dates during the month of June. They'll have their own camps. Lanning, I was at this camp where we're watching where Lanning went. He went to the Northwest Showcase, which is in Monmouth, Oregon, a small community town where Western Oregon University is located. He went there this past weekend, and then he went north to the Avery Showcase, where our colleague Brandon Huffman puts it on up in the Tacoma area. Oregon staff had almost everybody at the Northwest Showcase. They sent a couple people up to the Tacoma one. They're all over the country right now. So they're not only are they hosting visits, they're also going out and doing evals, in-person scouting, working and talking with prospects as well, and then hustling home for weekend visits, which start this week with June 7th weekend slated to have 8 or more prospects on campus. We're trying to confirm a couple extras that may have trickled in that we haven't updated onto the list yet. But you look at the list here, and there's 6 players that are top 247 prospects in the country coming on campus this weekend for official visits. 3 other guys are 3-star players that Oregon has offered that they are high on, and these players are high on Oregon. And then you look down the list the following week, they've got 11 slated for June 14th. And then they've got 11 again slated for June 21st. And that's where a couple 5-stars are going to be on campus. There's another 5-star that's coming on campus June 14th. So it's an important stretch. And it's a time where Oregon has 7 verbal commitments. They're ranked 23rd in the country. It's a little bit, they've kind of slid down the last couple of months in these rankings. They at one point were a top 10 team. They've lost a verbal commitment or two, but they've been able to add a couple as well. We should note that. But this is the month. They've been gearing up for, hey, let's push a lot of chips into the month of June. Let's get a lot of guys on campus. And for whatever reason, whether it's the schools, whether it's the players themselves choosing to make their decisions earlier and earlier, the month of June, like you said, has become kind of the November or the October where players take a couple visits and then shortly after make decisions. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, Eric, that you look at this list of visitors that are coming through the program in the month of June. There's a good chance Oregon could land half these guys by July or by the end of July or by the start of the football season in September. That's what's at stake this month. And it's a huge piece to the puzzle for Oregon trying to yet again sign its best class in school history, which is very much on the table, even though they only have 7 commits and even though they're in the top 25, but they're not in, they haven't broken the 20 mark yet. It's still possible. It's still projecting that way.
Yeah, if you actually sort by average recruit, you can go do this on 24/7 Sports dashboard. Oregon has the 2nd best class in the country behind Ohio State. They just only have 7 commits, and like I said earlier, they're all blue chip kids. So it's a great start. And Matt, let's just talk about this weekend because this is the start of it. As you ran through there, 30 guys scheduled right now. I'm guessing that number will grow. There might be guys that cancel trips.
Sure.
Who are some of the, let's just run through all 8 names. And I know I've watched their huddle film, so I have some kind of insights to provide too, but kind of run through the names and kind of where things stand.
Yeah, Dorian Brew, let's start with the top player there. Actually, let's go with the commit first. Cooper Perry, okay. 4-star wide receiver from Notre Dame Preparatory in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's a top 247 prospect. He's a top 35 player at the receiver position nationally, the 3rd best player in the state of Arizona. A 6'1", 185-pound receiver, a guy that has a host of offers from basically every major conference in the country. Oregon, he's one of the top players out west, especially at his position. Oregon was able to get him up multiple times for unofficial visits, and he committed earlier this year, and he'll be coming up for his official to kind of be one of the kids that are here to pure recruit, if you will, other players. He's one of 2 receivers on campus this weekend as well. The next one is Dorian Brew, a cornerback from Texas. He's the highest rated prospect expected to be on campus as of now. He's the 7th best cornerback nationally, the 11th best player in the state. He just missed being a top 60 player. He's ranked 61st overall. A real tall, rangy player. We'll talk about these guys' films later, but another player that Oregon is in a really good position for. Ohio State's probably viewed as the leader, but Texas is also involved. LSU is also involved. Ohio State's trying to be involved. But Oregon's in a position where, if this visit goes well, they knock it out of the park, they might be able to move up into that top spot for his pecking order right now. Offensive tackle Zaire Addison from Sumner High School in the state of Florida. He's a top 15 offensive tackle in the country. He's ranked 140th nationally. He's the 19th best player in the state of Florida. Oregon, UCLA, Penn State, Florida State, Florida, all getting official visits. He took his official visit to Florida and UCLA in the month of May. So this will be his 3rd of 5 visits. And he's been on campus at Oregon a bunch. This is a guy that's very familiar with Oregon. Distance probably is going to play a factor here for a little bit, even though he doesn't say it's that big of a deal. But you look at the schools, Florida, Florida State, Penn State, those are drastically closer to home than UCLA and Oregon. But can Oregon's a school that positioned themselves where they can get out of that, and they're a serious player. It would not surprise me in the slightest if a couple weeks later he makes a decision. Hey, I'm going to make a decision on X date, and if it's Oregon, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Mason Posa, a linebacker from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Wisconsin's kind of viewed as the front runner here. Was on campus last weekend with the Badgers. Now he comes to Eugene for a June 7th visit, and then he's also got one locked in for Texas A&M on the 21st. These are his top 3 schools. These are the schools that he's focused on. A commitment could come shortly after that A&M visit. Highly decorated high school football player in the state of New Mexico, is also an elite wrestler as well, which is what you love to see as a linebacker. Top 20 player at his position nationally, almost a 150 player. He's ranked 154th nationally as well. And obviously, coming from the state of New Mexico, he's the number 1 player in that state. Now, Chris Lawson is a 4-star receiver from Archbishop Riordan High School in San Francisco, California. He's a player that's interesting. He's making a commitment on June 21st. Oregon, Cal, Washington are his final schools. He saw Washington last weekend, is here this weekend at Oregon, and then he'll go to California on the 14th. Oregon likes him as a receiver, but they also like him as a defensive back as well. This one's going to be interesting to watch. Like, I could easily see him land at Cal. I could easily see him land at Washington. I could easily see him land for the Oregon Ducks. And this is a guy that I think maybe Oregon's view of other players at the receiver position might impact where they recruit Chris Lawson, and that might impact his decision-making. Is he totally open being a DB at Oregon opposed to going to Washington or going to Cal and being a receiver? Those are things that you just kind of have to juggle, and we'll see what happens from an Oregon perspective there. And then Hayden Lowe is a top 20 player as an edge prospect nationally. He's a top 25 prospect in California. He's 23rd there, and he's the 231st best player in the country in the 2025 class. Plays his football at Oaks Christian High School in SoCal. Miami had him on campus last weekend. He was at UCLA a couple weekends ago, and then he'll be at Oregon this week, Texas next weekend. A really big opportunity for Oregon to make a strong push here for a really talented prospect. And then 2 other names to know: Dimitri Manning and Austin Pay, 2 3-star offensive tackles. Manning hails from Bellevue, Washington, a 3-star player, top 5 player in the state, has officials already made to UCLA, Washington, plus upcoming visits to Oregon, Arkansas, and Miami. And then Austin Pay is a 3-star massive human being from Lone Peak High School in Utah, a top 5 player in the state there as well. Has also taken an official to Arkansas, with spots set for NC State and Texas A&M to go with Oregon. So it's a weekend, Eric, where I think there's some really top heavy talent. I would look at like Brew and Addison being kind of some studs. I'm curious your thoughts on Posa. You've watched and did a story on their film reviews. And then you got some like long-term plays with guys like Pay, Manning, and maybe even Chris Lawson to a degree.
Yeah, it's funny when you watch these things, sometimes the films aren't complete season films, and that was the case for Brew. And I'll be honest, Brew's film for a top 60 kid didn't like light up it didn't jump out maybe the way I expected. And part of that was just because of the limited number of games on it, but maybe also something to do with just how good he is in coverage. He just kind of locked his guy up. It seemed like the majority of it was just the ball going other places while he had his guy covered. So you don't hate seeing that as a corner, but I was hoping to see a little bit more ball hawk, a little bit more of that sort of thing. Obviously somebody that the scouts have seen a lot more than I have. So I'll go ahead and stick with their rankings. But I think the 2 guys that popped to me the most were Addison and Posa. Addison plays tackle down there. I think they're looking at him maybe as guard collegiately, but like big, strong, super athletic. A couple clips of him pulling. He just gets out there and mauls guys, plays mean. Great body from a frame perspective. I think a player you can totally see fitting into what Elite Terry's trying to do. And then Posa, it doesn't surprise me at all. He's got a wrestling background. That guy just flies around, super physical, makes some really impressive athletic plays. Like, this is a guy who I look at and kind of a little bit of like Braden Platt from last year in terms of just big, athletic, can do a lot of things, a lot of versatility, good ball skills. I think the first play on the huddle film is him, kind of misreading, I guess I should say, on a draw play, taking the quarterback out and then continuing behind the play and bringing down the running back. So I like this kid a lot. Oregon needs to find linebackers this cycle. I'll be curious to see, I guess, kind of where this goes. Wisconsin would be an interesting fit just because of just the way they play. Maybe that's more favorable, but for someone like Kim who maybe wants to play more downhill. But I think he's a really nice linebacker prospect. I found both of the offensive tackle prospects down the list, Pay and Manning, to be really intriguing. Manning, I've actually seen at a couple of these regional camps. He was at SNL the last couple of years. This kid's like 6'7", 6'8", 330, 340 pounds, just like a really big dude. He was one of the guys a couple of years ago, when I think maybe in 22, that I pointed to Brendan Huffman, like, who's that kid? Just because he stood out physically. He was just so big. I don't think he's super twitchy or super athletic necessarily. I could see him maybe playing guard because of that, but he is a road grader, and he puts your hands on guys, and the guys go backwards, which is what you expect at this level. So I really like what I see there. I think Pay's a little more athletic. I definitely think he projects more as a tackle.
Manning is like, we kind of freaked out over, not kind of, we did freak out over how big Shaq McRoy is for Oregon as a true freshman. Manning is just like that body type. Absolutely one of the largest human beings. To steal a Mario Cristobal quote, he blocks the sun when he stands in front of you.
Yeah, and there's a reason Mario's recruiting him, because he likes those kind of guys. And so, I think McRoy's a little bit more athletic, maybe a little more agile. But
100% he is. Manning was a tackle, and basically every college has said, no, you're a guard. You're not athletic enough to play tackle.
Yeah, but I mean, imagine in a couple of years, theoretically, if McRoy and Manning are like your right side of the offensive line or left side of the offensive line. That's just going to be two massive maulers. That's SEC type body types and size. So I find those guys to be really intriguing. Chris Lawson kind of reminded me a little of Gary Bryant as a receiver, kind of similar, not like a super flashy player, runs good routes, a lot of slot stuff, has a little bit of pop in terms of open field stuff, but just seems like he's somebody who'd be very reliable. I think that would be a good fit, especially because, this receivers class, they've already got 3 committed, and I think he's different than the other guys, which is sort of seeming like the staple of Junior Adams the last couple classes, where sure, you're going to get your big outside receivers like your Jurian Dickey and your Kyler Casper, but you're also going to get some of those kind of underneath guys, some slot guys, and then some more possession receivers. So I'd like the fit just with the receiver class this year, because they've already got Wilson committed. They've already got Perry, who we talked about, committed. I love his film. I think we've talked about that before on the podcast. And then they have Isaiah Mosey, another 4-star wide receiver from, I think, Missouri, committed. So if this is how they complete the receiver core, it ain't a bad one. I'm sure there are other targets they're looking at, but I find him to be really interesting, Matt. And as you said, maybe I don't know, the most likely to commit, but he's the one who's got a commitment date coming up most.
I think what happens this weekend, from an Oregon perspective, will probably dictate a lot of what Chris Lawson decides. Like, if Oregon says, hey, we're all in on you playing the position that you want to play the most, whether that's receiver or corner or some kind of defensive back, I think Oregon moves to the top of the list. His high school coach, different coaches, obviously, different schools too. His high school coach was Troy Franklin's high school coach at a different school. Menlo, I believe, is where Troy Franklin went to school in the Bay Area. And obviously Mario recruited Troy Franklin, but Dan Lanning coached Franklin for 2 years, and 2 of those 3 years that he was in school. And his high school coach loves Oregon, loves the staff at Oregon, doesn't push kids one way or the other, but like there is a familiarity there with Oregon and his high school coach and Lawson and the guys that he's kind of looked up to, which is Troy Franklin being one of them. I think if Oregon's all in on Lawson playing receiver or whatever position he wants to play the most, I think they move to the forefront and they become the clear clubhouse leader. But if there's I'm really interested in playing on Oregon. I like you guys. I like the facility. Everything's a perfect fit, but I really want to play position X and X only, and you're wanting me to maybe play X or Z. I could see that be the crack in the armor that leads him to another school. So this weekend probably, I think, is going to go a long ways in terms of locking in where he fits within Oregon and kind of how he views it and how that fits for him. But then you also have to factor in, like, hey, next weekend they've got Marcus Harris, a very similar receiver, a higher rated player, a similar rated player from SoCal, Mater Dei High School. He's coming into town for an official visit. And then Oregon's also going to be bringing in in 2 weeks, 5-star receiver Corian Moore, plus a receiver in Dallas Wilson that's committed to Oregon that a lot of schools are trying to go after. We also know that they're heavily involved with Michael Terry. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of names that are either just as good or, quite frankly, and this is no slight to Chris Lawson, but simply better players at the receiver position. And Oregon's going to have to make a real tough call here. Like, do they want to risk not maybe getting a commitment for Lawson and going after a bigger fish, or do they secure a guy and it takes away the possibility of landing someone who's a little bit higher rated in the rankings?
It's a numbers game, and I'm kind of interested to see what the numbers look like at receiver. Last year they took 5 guys. Obviously, Gatlin Barrett didn't enroll, and he'll enroll in 26. There's going to be a lot of outgoing talent. We know Tez Johnson's gone. We know Trayshawn Holden's gone. I think we all expect Evan Stewart will also be gone based upon the NFL draft buzz around him. That's 3 players. Do you really want to take 4? Do you want to take 5? Like, what I'm curious what they're comfortable with. Obviously, a DeCorian Moore or a Terry are locks. You take those guys if they want to come out west. You wonder about Dallas Wilson. Matt, you brought him up. That's a name that's been kind of like on the radar as, hey, is he actually going to sign with Oregon, or is he just a placeholder? Kind of what's going on there. But this is going to be a position I think we'll be talking about a lot throughout the course of this recruiting season, I should say. And at Lawson, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that works, because that was kind of what I alluded to earlier when I said there were some guys coming in later this month that are probably more high priority prospects, and Lawson's made it clear he wants to make a decision soon. How much is Oregon willing to wait? That's sort of what you're juggling there, I think.
100%. And I'm curious about Posa too. I know you love his film. Mm-hmm. Exactly like what you said, what a linebacker should look like.
Love his film. It's great.
This feels a lot like, hey, the first real legitimate bigger program, got him on campus, made a strong impression, knocked it out of the park. They probably had amazing weather in Madison in late May. Just a great day, just a great weekend for that visit. But then Oregon's a different tier. And to an extent, A&M is a different tier as well. I'm real curious to see. It wouldn't surprise me if ground can quickly get made up by Oregon this weekend, and maybe they push themselves into the forefront to get Posa. It's a program that, look, we cover Oregon, and so if you're a Wisconsin fan somehow and you find this podcast, like, we're not trying to be biased here, but Oregon is simply a far better program from where they are right now in terms of competing for a college football playoff spot from a brand identity standpoint. And that's not to say Wisconsin's not a good program, because they are. I mean, they've played Oregon twice in the Rose Bowl. They win a lot of games every year, but there's a reason why Oregon is viewed as the way they are recently, and they're just a bigger brand, if you will. I'm curious how much of that factors into this recruitment as well. We saw it all the time, like with Ohio State a couple years ago, with USC, with us growing up, like they just kind of swoop in and they're the big name, and they just take a guy that middle tier A level school thought they were going to have, which is kind of what this could become.
I love to, well, I know we're going to have like Brandon or Greg or Blair or maybe Tom Loy or someone come on here in the future to talk recruiting. I'd be curious what the conversation is about a kid from New Mexico in terms of rankings. Because I watched this and was like, this is one of the better linebacker tapes I've seen in a couple of years. Like, I really, really like this prospect. And I'm just wondering, a kid from Albuquerque, like, how many eyes are getting on this guy from like a, you know, what's his camp schedule? Like, what has he been able to show guys? Because he feels like a guy who could easily be a top 100 recruit. I know he's like 151 right now, so it's not like he's totally overlooked and a total diamond in the rough. But remember how Gatlin Bear from Idaho just like went from being kind of like a, you know, he's like a top 100 guy to soaring at the end, and now he's a consensus 5-star. I'm not saying Posa has that rise, but I'm just wondering, kind of similar in that these are really high-end athletes, dual sport athletes who maybe come from smaller states where there's not as much recruiting infrastructure, I guess. And I'll just be curious to kind of follow him regardless of if he ends up at Oregon or Wisconsin or A&M or whatever.
And then I'm also curious, like Zaire Addison, like this is a name that's been here a bunch. I wish I had the data in front of me. I don't. But I want to say he's now been on campus like 4 times in the last 12 months at Oregon for unofficial visits. Like he's gotten out to Oregon a lot. And I just kind of wonder, like, things go right here. And we know the state of Florida. Billy Napier is fighting tooth and nail to just keep the pitchforks from winning and kicking him out of there. Florida State has obviously turned things around with Mike Norvell. They are no longer in the Willie Taggart era. They're really good. But I think Oregon's positioned themselves where, like, you look at this and be like, they are by far a legitimate player here. And maybe with the track record that Alik Terry is starting to develop with Josh Connolly Jr., Johnny Cornelius, and then you look at the guys the last couple of seasons that have come through Oregon and the history that's starting to develop at Oregon from an offensive tackle and offensive line standpoint. And, you know, maybe that kind of wins things over a little bit and can convince Addison to go across the country to Oregon. And it's probably really enticing to know that, hey, Oregon's a legitimate team now that every year they're probably a top 10-ish, maybe a little under the top 10, maybe a little above top 10. And there's an opportunity for me to go in and potentially start as a true freshman in 2025 because Cornelius is for sure gone. And Josh Connolly could be a first-round draft pick and be off after the 2024 season.
There's definitely some Johnny Cornelius vibes too on film. Like, and I'll be curious if he's like, because I think athletically he's more tackle, but I don't know. I'll be curious to see what they decide to do there. I know he plays tackle. He plays left tackle down in Florida in high school. Probably could play guard. I think that's the case for a lot of these guys, but great movement skills. And I'm with you, Matt. This would be somebody who I don't know. Like, it's hard to project which true freshmen are going to play. Like, none of us thought Poncho was going to be a contributor last year, and he ended up playing more snaps than any true freshman. But he's a guy who I could see him being ready early, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to know because sometimes these guys get to campus and look different than you expect. But you watch his film, like I said, he and Poster were the two I watched and was like, wow, these are real dudes, and these would be really big ads if they could get them. And that's not to say other players that are visiting wouldn't be, but just watching the film, those are the guys that to me kind of popped the most.
All right. I think that's going to do it for us on this show. We'll do this again next week to kind of recap what happened and also to preview the following week because, look, it's going to be like this for 3 weeks in a row. There are a bunch of top 50, a bunch of top 100, a bunch of top 247 prospects coming on campus in the next 3 weeks. And we'll talk it all. We'll break it down. We'll get some other analysts on the site, on the podcast as well, to give some insight there. Before we go, I want to remind you, go subscribe to duckterritory.com, 60% off right now. It's the most impactful way to support the podcast and ensure that we keep doing these for free. And Eric, myself, Jared, and can continue to cover the program from a full scope perspective, recruiting and team coverage, as well as other sports the way that we do. But until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.